I wanted to put this panel together because you tweeted this out, Curtis, before, and you got similar. You were in a similar position with this as you were with your Ukraine takes, where you were doing something
Pretty much, yeah.
You're in a pretty kind of nuanced position, and then both both the liberals and the leftists both shat on you for different reasons from different sides. So I'm just going to pull this up on my stream, but I'm going to read it out for everyone else who's in the panel. I don't need a perfectly pure left-wing leader to vote Labour. Rayner, Burnham, and others from the moderate centre-left would make it very easy for me to vote for them. But Keir Starmer is a Conservative, his policy and worldview is Conservative, simple as. And then you follow on by saying, most of these replies have come from Starmer fans. Apparently it is dogmatic to admit that I would massively compromise on a candidate to get my vote. Also, I live in a safe Labour seat. My vote doesn't count, but that won't stop Starmerites calling everybody a Tory enabler. So do you want to take me through your thought process on what about why you put that tweet out specifically?
The thing is, okay, so my standard of candidate has dropped so hard after what happened in the Corbyn years. And the rightward drift in the Conservative Party, and obviously the massively rightward drift on the Labour Party, I've come to the position where I'm like, in order to earn my vote, I'm easy. I'm pretty easy. But I want someone who actually resembles anything Labour. And I wanted to draw a distinction between an actual moderate and someone like Keir Starmer, because a lot of people will put Keir Starmer in the moderate camp, and then it's either the Keir Starmer lot or it's the Corbyn lot, the hard left or the moderate. That's not the case. It's a bit more gradual than that. But the Labour Party is a broad church. You have the left, you have the centre left, you have the moderates, right? But I wanted to make it clear that Keir Starmer doesn't belong to any of them. He is literally Conservative. Now, I didn't mean to in the tweet, but that was Twitter autocorrect, which put Conservative with capital C. It was supposed to be a small c Conservative. I'm not saying he's a Tory. Well, he is a Tory, right? But I'm not saying he's like a registered member of the Conservative Party. I'm saying his politics, his worldview on economic and social issues are conservative. And I want people to know there's a distinction between people like Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer. So I made that distinction. And then I also said, look, I don't need anyone perfect to vote Labour, just someone who's mildly left. Angela Rayner supported Rebecca Long-Bailey for leader. That was sort of the dream team. So she's not as conservative or right-wing as Keir Starmer. Andy Burnham, who was just terrible in 2015, has, I think, impressed me quite a bit, and he's exceeded my expectations of what he's been like as Manchester Mayor with the public ownership. So for me, I was like, well, look, there's probably some leftist policies that will come to fruition under someone like Rayner, someone like Andy Burnham. So I made that tweet because, I see the political system for what it is. We saw what happened to someone like Jeremy Corbyn. We'll never get a left-wing candidate like him ever again. So at least let's take someone who doesn't exactly hate the left. And yeah, I mean, you got the usual replies. You get people saying, "Why would you vote for Rayner? Because Rayner's a backstabber." With Angela Rayner though, I think, to me, a mark of someone's integrity is whether someone moves to the right willingly or someone is kind of forced to the right. So what I mean by that is Angela Rayner, I don't think she wanted to stab Corbyn in any way. I think she was happy with the Corbyn leadership. She was happy to back another left-wing candidate, but she was probably forced to sort of stab Corbyn a little bit. I'm not excusing her, but I don't think she would have done it without being pushed. Someone like Keir Starmer, he's moved the Labour Party to the right on policy and on rhetoric without anyone pushing him. In fact, he's outflanking the Conservatives to the right on so many things, and we're like, but no one's even pushing him to that position. So I think Rayner, Burnham, a lot of the moderate centre, I say moderate centre left, probably more centrist, they triangulate. They actually do accept the argument that maybe we should be a bit moderate to get elected. So I accept that from them, and I do think they would over-deliver in some aspects of policy. Someone like Keir Starmer, though, you don't need to convince him, you don't need to push him to the right, he runs to the right. I think it's a clear distinction between someone like Starmer and the candidates I put in my tweet. But yeah, so a lot of the response were like, why would you support Austerity Burnham or backstabber Rayner? And I didn't specifically mean those two candidates. I was like candidates like them.
Yeah.
Who work in the same circles. But I got more responses from Starmerites who are like,
you're a Tory enabler.
Well, you're a Tory enabler, but then you go through half of their Twitter accounts and you'll see they voted Lib Dem or Greens at the last election anyway, or the last two elections anyway. But they were saying you're dogmatic, you need to be more flexible. I'm like, I've quite literally written a tweet saying that I am willing to vote for someone who is not of my politics, is far more moderate to get elected. It's just that Keir Starmer is a step too far, because we have to have some sort of principles, right? And the reason why they're saying that is because they're like red team good, blue team bad. If Keir Starmer was a conservative, all those people saying you need to get behind Starmer would be hating on him because he's conservative. The consistency of those of us on the left don't dislike people because of their party. We dislike them because of their policies. I don't care what party you come from. I'm going to dislike you on your policies. We're not hyper partisan like these Starmerites are.
Yeah, sure. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll just contend with one thing. You said that we'd never get the likes of Jeremy Corbyn again. I don't think that's necessarily true, actually. You've got to bear in mind that he was elected by a pretty right-wing party in 2015 or 2016, whatever it was, for the kind of influx of people who were deliberately Corbyn people or whatever. And so I think the Labour Party itself, the core membership, I think would support someone like that again in the future. Whether it's actually feasible for a person like that to get elected, I think is rather more contestable. But
Well,
I think
that's
the
what I
idea of
mean,
it
really.
being leader, I think it's perfectly plausible that could happen.
So there's this argument, right? There's this argument coming from a lot of people with regards to that, saying that, well, look, what we have seen, what is the last what the 2017 to 2019, 2015 even 2019 showed us is the Labour establishment, Labour HQ, the establishment Labour candidates and the people who were part of the machinations of the Labour Party. They at the time they threw their toys out of the pram to ensure that there was going to be no leftist leader that could therefore they tried to get rid of him, and then when it's clear that couldn't happen, they tried to tank the election to get rid of him on the back end as well. So it's very clear that the whole Labour structure is antagonistic towards its own left wing membership, and that's gone so far that that now it's not just trying to throw elections and trying to rig leadership elections within the party and try and force the platform rightward. They're now at the point where they're purging left members from the party as well, literally revoking people's memberships because they are diverging away from the ideological groupthink that the Labour right want the entirety of the party to adopt. So it's far more hostile to leftists within the party than ever was. There's a great clip that Curtis retweeted today from the Not the Andrew Marr show, talking about with Michael Crick, talking about how this was never a thing that was happening under the Labour leaders of all the times past, right? Even Tony Blair was very happy for there to be leftist elements to the party as long as first of all, mainly had a gigantic majority, so he didn't need to care about what the leftists said. But we never wanted factional purges. Corbyn voted against the whip huge numbers of times, and rightly so because they're all Tory votes because the Tories voted with them regardless. But Blair never bothered in this factional infighting. He just knew that all that mattered was getting policy through. But Starmer has a clear platform that he is putting here to try and ensure that leftoids have no say within anything to do with the Labour Party, to the point of which purging them from membership. And then if you're saying, right, there's two arguments to what I'm making here is, first of all, does that mean that leftist engagement with the Labour Party can only be on a utilitarian basis because we're just lesser eviling all the time, because there's no point in trying, at this point, post-Corbyn years, to try and move the party leftwards? And the second part saying is, well, if you're voting for these people, you are voting for a party that is explicitly anti-left at this point. And therefore, how can you ever, regardless of leader, lend your vote to that party given those party structures? Now, I don't agree with that second point. I'm playing devil's advocate here. But I do believe in the first point. We can engage with it on a utilitarian basis, but I think that it's still negative utility because of how hostile Starmer is and because of how right-wing his platform is.
I would caution against the blanket all policy on engagement, whether it be utilitarian or otherwise. I think you have to take each vote that would be lent, and it would be a lend of a vote rather than like an affirmative "yay, I believe in this party" type thing, on a vote by vote basis. So, for instance, in like the local council elections, I think it's a very different situation because you're not dealing with Starmer, although albeit that you are still giving him a certain amount of potential ammunition or potential credit on a national basis, but ultimately you're voting for the thing that matters on your local level. And I think certainly, like in my council, it's a Labour council and has done a pretty fucking good job actually of ameliorating the negative impacts of Tory cuts to council budgets, which is basically the best you can realistically do under the system as it currently is.
I mean, look at Preston, right?
Exactly, yeah. Or I mean, as has been discussed with Andy Burnham, for instance, you've got if they're doing the best they realistically can in that situation, I've got no problem lending them my vote on a basis of a much more positive affirmation of the things that they've done, given the situation they're in. Whereas on a national level, you are brought more into a geographic situation, because if you're in a Tory Lib Dem seat, especially if you've got a vaguely leftist MP, you're in a very different situation than if you're, as Curtis, you can basically throw your vote away because it doesn't really matter, because you're in a seat that your vote doesn't actually make any impact. So it has to be done on a kind of case by case basis, which doesn't make for great sweeping statements, which make for good content online, but does actually make for much better politics in a nuanced world.
True.
Yeah, I don't know if I would regard Starmer as necessarily being conservative. I'd say more that I just don't know who he is. I've got no idea. His it's really hard to pin him down on anything, because what he believes changes depending on what he thinks is politically expedient at that time. So everybody knows that Starmer switched from like the Remainer sort of, the king of Remainers and all this stuff, and then to a like Remainer lefty position, just to at the end of Jeremy Corbyn's term when he was running for leader, and then switched and decided that actually no, I'm not in favour of free movement anymore. No, I'm going to break all the 10 pledges I've made, and it was a totally different person to the one who ran for the leadership election. But because we're leftists, we don't really count. People can lie to us and get away with it. They won't get anywhere near as much scrutiny in the media as if they lie to the general public more widely, or indeed right wing. I'm not even going to say right wing parties, because I think the right of the party also get a bit of a free pass. Like the Blairites get a bit of a free pass when it comes to lying to the public. But I forgot where I was going with that now. I don't really know who he is, and so it's very difficult to pin him down as a conservative. But interestingly, Oliver Eagleton, in the book he wrote, the Starmer Project, the autobiography, the biography of Keir Starmer that he wrote, tells an interesting anecdote about Starmer and Brexit. So this was before Starmer changed his Brexit position, and before he was running for Labour leader under Jeremy Corbyn. And apparently, one of their advisors took Starmer a plan, a Brexit policy position plan, because he'd been rejecting everything that they'd been throwing at them, and they got Starmer to write out some of his proposals, and then they took it away. They reworded it, but it said the exact same thing as what he'd asked them to say. He came, they came back to him, asked him, and he said, "No, I'm throwing that out." So the conclusion that a lot of the civil servants and not civil servants, but the staff around Starmer came to, Labour Party staff around Starmer came to, is that he was just trying to stall for time. He was just trying to frustrate the process. He didn't want Labour to come down on a position. So in a way, he's gone from not really not really being a committed Remainer or a Brexiteer to being a Remainer to being a Brexiteer. Like Boris Johnson, he will just jump depending on what he thinks is politically expedient, but he doesn't get criticised for it in the same way as Boris Johnson would.
I just want to point
it's also possible,
just before we move on, just from that position, I genuinely believe that Keir Starmer is a conservative. I think that the crucial distinction here is that we know already that that it's been basically proven at this point and exposed that there was a plan specifically to lie to the left of the party to try and get the leadership of the party, right? We know that from the things that's been told by Sebastian Payne and things that's been told by, was it Margaret Beckett, I think it was? Or was it Margaret Hodge? It was one of the two.
Margaret Hodge came out and said it, yeah.
Yeah, so we know that he lied to do that. And what evidence do we have other than his TV appearances and all the public appearances that he's given that he doesn't specifically believe all of the things that he's saying right now?
Well, I think these two can connect, right? Because on one instance, when you give the Brexit analogy, which is hilarious, by the way, I think it's not just because I want to frustrate the Brexit position. It's also because I don't think he's particularly knowledgeable. We know that Aaron Bassani has said many times that it's been reported that Keir Starmer is got an Ed Miliband and Ed Balls, and they gave him essentially an economics lesson for dummies because he doesn't know what he's really talking about. I don't think he's particularly knowledgeable on policy. Now, one of obviously the early traits that Keir Starmer had was that he was forensic, which we all take a piss out of, right? He's not forensic because he's actually just a slave to detail. He could probably recount loads of words to you and bore you to sleep, but I don't think he has any particular analysis on anything. But his political instincts, I think, is conservative, and his political instincts when it comes to factionism, he'll always side with the right. So I don't. It's almost like I don't even know what policies, not just in favour of, but what policies he's against. But he'll turn to some advisors like, right, what do Blairites think about this? They're like, no, I don't like that. I guess that's correct then. I think it's more about his political instincts. Which makes them even more valuable by right wingers, because there may have been a point in Keir Starmer's career that he could have led a centre-left Labour Party, but he's not confident in his own views, that he's very easy pulled to the right. And one principle he does have, which is what I would say the principle of the Blairites and the Labourite is, the one principle we have is to not be left-wing, and that is it. Anything else is up for grabs, but it's just not to be left-wing. And from the beginning, we've seen Keir Starmer, obviously, with this Keir Stalin authoritarianism in the Labour Party. So, I think that's the only principle he has.
Yeah, I think he's. I mean, I think he is conservative to a degree. I think it's more than that. I think he's an institutionalist, which isn't surprising given that he's former head of the CPS and he's deeply ensconced in
top
legal...
cop.
Yeah, exactly.
Fucking cop.
Exactly. So it's not surprising that he is an institutionalist, but that, unfortunately, when you get into the Westminster bubble, will automatically drag you right. It will automatically drag you into this kind of almost genteel Victorian establishment mentality, whereas Jeremy Corbyn would happily go and give a speech to some striking, teachers or whatever. Keir Starmer will happily go and, I don't know, ensconce himself in 55 Tufton Street or wherever, right? He's much more at home in the genteel world of pretending that the real world isn't there, of the Westminster bubble, than Jeremy Corbyn. And that's why people who are in the Westminster bubble, the journalists, the lawyers, the kind of policy wonks, the civil servants, all despise Jeremy Corbyn, not just because he has different politics, but he represents a completely different mindset that fundamentally would challenge their core power at the heart of Britain.
I think
I don't know who said that, but that was one of the points someone made, was that the reason why he was hated so much in the media class is that he just showed a big fat mirror to them, because he's outside of the political game. Most of the Labour Party and all the Conservative Party are within this political game, and then you've got this
carousel.
this fake outrage, like between two sides, but actually they will shake hands and get along. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn was actually antagonistic in a real way.
This actually came up the other day. I was watching a James O'Brien, notorious J.O.B.
How to be right,
where he was talking about Brexit, obviously, and he was talking about Bill Cash, the Conservative MP. Sir William Cash, and happened to just slip in there, I'm very good friends with his son. Look, of course he fucking is. So even the Tory MP he's disagreeing with on a matter of fundamental policy, he's friends with his son. They're all part of a club, and none of us are invited.
Exactly. I was making this this point as well. Obviously, the fact that all the media are complicit too, in the big club, as George Carlin would put it, right? And then because Keir Starmer is specifically focused on power, he will always tend towards that groupthink because he, quite frankly, is scared of the media, right? We all saw how he reacted during Beergate and how he kind of fell apart when he has basically been inside this press kind of cloaking device, this force field of absence of press scrutiny because he was the person who ousted Jeremy Corbyn like the press wanted him to. As soon as Beergate happened, he fucking fell apart. He didn't know what to do because there was like some very right-wing leaning sections of media that didn't play the same media game that the establishment media do. And as soon as he faced scrutiny, and you could see him getting angry, being interviewed by Sophie Ridge on Sky News, incisively questioning him over his broken pledges. And Keir Starmer was angry. He was physically angry. You could see him trying to find any kind of justification for the fact that he's a duplicitous piece of shit. But yeah, I think this anti-establishment thing is correct. Like the one, just on my last as a last point, there was this thing that was going around on Twitter of a picture, or was it a picture? Or was it a story of Rachel Reeves and George Osborne talking to each other at some fucking cocktail party? And if that is like the absolute peak of political establishment in this country, and the public are crying out for sincerity, and they're getting fucking none of it from nowhere in politics, apart from, I guess, from Richard Tice at this point, is the only person who's actually being sincere in the worst way possible.
That's why we have the sort of Tories for Keir Starmer. That he's the acceptable face of the Labour Party because he's not really going to change much at all. The fundamentals are going to stay the same. So that's why you've got Anna Soubry like, do you know what? I could vote for Keir Starmer, I could. And you've got Rachel Reeves taking tips off George Osborne, who was, you know, one of the biggest reasons why there was 240,000 deaths in the UK. Because he's the acceptable face of the establishment.
But John Bercow joining the Labour Party.
Well, I heard rumours that he was supposed to be joining the Labour Party years before. I don't know, because actually, as establishment hack that he is, I quite enjoyed him.
I know he's fun, don't get me wrong, but his politics is still dog shit.
I mean, Bercow was a Corbyn defender. Bercow defended Corbyn from the anti-Semitism smears. Said, I've been in Parliament with Corbyn for, you know, all of these years, and he was never thought he was anti-Semitic at all. So
but there were many
actually principled.
Sorry. There were many Conservatives that defended Corbyn in the early years. I mean, you had Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, he's a piece of shit. He said, well, Jeremy Corbyn is an actual proper Labour Party politician. He has principles. I disagree with him, but he has principles. There were countless Tory MPs defending Jeremy Corbyn, even on his foreign policy, because no one was really hounding Jeremy Corbyn at that time. Now, of course, most of them jumped ship and joined in on the harassment of Corbyn because it was the popular thing to do. But there were many people across the aisle defending Corbyn on a basis of principle, which is almost in an argument for me in which that you don't need to move to the centre to win elections and win voters. You can be very left-wing, but you can convince the most right-wing people. Well, you convince a lot of Conservatives to come your way. Actually, funny enough, my partner's mum, she's a lifelong Conservative. Very, very Tory, and she's talking about support for public ownership, and she's like very classic Conservative voter.
Well, exactly. I mean, like, it's just a super majority of people in this country, when they get polled, say they support public ownership of mail, rail, energy, and water. So it's not about optical position with regards to electability that people might want to just not want to show support for these policies. It's because the establishment doesn't like it. It's the only reason why you do it, and that's why someone like Richard Tice is very happy to come out and say the Tories were bad for doing all this privatisation, because he's doing it from the right. It's acceptable to say if you're from the right.
Yeah. I'd like to believe the British people actually do believe in the things that they say they believe in. I've become so jaded by the fact that the British public, when asked, will say they believe in all of the nice things and then vote for literal Satan when it comes round to them actually having to implement anything. So the very same people who said they support, public ownership or support the NHS, support this, support that, gave a 90-seat majority to Boris Alexander to Pfeffel Johnson. I'm loath to ever believe the British public when asked, until it comes down to an actual election where it matters, and they always vote for the worst possible options.
Well, that's the issue.
Sorry to be Blackpool about it, but
but it might be part of the broken media we have.
I mean, that is definitely
largely.
Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, you make a good point as well. Sorry, go on.
Just as an aside, that like the real doom-pilling moment is 2015, right? When, after all 5 years of austerity, riots, like the social fabric of the country falling apart during the austerity years, the Liberals were all just like, "Oh, has my mortgage increased? No, guess I'm voting Conservative." That's it, right?
I think there was a point you made there, Kev, though, that maybe people are supporting this policy in a very vague way. They like the idea of public ownership, but when election comes round and one party supports public ownership and another party says, all right, if we go with public ownership, your tax is going to go up. Whether it's true or not, I think people get frightened off a bit too easy. So maybe they're supportive of broad leftist policies in the vaguest possible way. Because obviously our media is completely broken in this country, but the media does report on policy. It completely makes out that it's the worst ever thing to happen, broadband communism, for example. But it does say this is what the Labour Party policies are. And if you've got an electorate that says, well, we actually support these policies, and then turn and not vote for them, yes, obviously the media is an issue, but are we being too simplistic by saying, just the damn media? Maybe people supporting these policies, yeah, it's too vague. They like the idea of it, but when it's actually put in front of them, we need to convince them a bit more.
Does the media actually tell people about policy? I mean, I didn't even know about the Inclusive Ownership Fund as a Labour Party policy until after the 2019 election. I wonder how many people, when they were asked, if you could, random people from the street, you asked them about what Labour stood for in 2019. Do you think any of them talked about, for example, the National Care Service, which, quite frankly, is one of the most important policies in the country? When we're looking at our ageing population and when we're looking at the breakdown of social care in this country, and when we're looking at the point at which where we're currently got a crop of boomers who can all sell their second properties for care money if they need to, because they all got second properties during the Blair years. Not all of them, obviously, but the amount of additional property wealth amongst that class of people massively increased during the 2000s. And then there's going to be our generation, or the Gen X, or the later Gen Xers, for example, who are going to have no care, because they're not going to have a second property to be able to sell for care in their old age, and they're not going to get enough on a state pension. So that's a policy that we really need, and the media did not report on that stuff. I don't think they did.
Well, the idea of manufactured consent has always been an idea that isn't like the media are informing you about politics, but rather they are presenting you with a certain set of ideas which lead you down a path that, and a lot of the media do it without having a conscious, like, oh, we're going to turn on, we're going to start the cameras for the BBC now, so everybody get the Conservative director in here so he can point us to which policies we're going to promote. Not like that. It's you get into certain positions if you're. You guys all know this. I'm just saying this for the chat, but like you get into certain positions if you have certain beliefs. If you're adequately right wing, adequately centrist, usually quite right wing. I remember from the 2019 election, my dad telling me a story when about he was working in somebody's house. I won't say what he does, but he was working in somebody's house, and he said that the election came up because it was coming up, so it came up in conversation, and the bloke said, and bear in mind this bloke had like a very small garden, it was probably 5 meters square, not anything huge, and he said, oh yeah, I won't be voting for Corbyn. I'll be voting for Boris. So I won't be voting for Corbyn because I don't want to. I don't want to get hit with the garden tax. Garden tax? What are you talking about? He somehow become convinced that Corbyn was going to come along and tax every square meter of his garden. According to some, the policies which just did not make any sense. But that's what most people get. They get like fractions of information that they then put together. And if enough of it is from the right wing, which we have a media in this country that is extremely right wing, and we've got studies from LSE and UCL showing that the media at the time was extremely anti-Corbyn, then what they're going to get is fractures of information where it doesn't matter that the majority of the public support the nationalisation of the railways, because what they got was fuck all to do with nationalisation of the railways. They weren't thinking about nationalisation of the railways. They were thinking, oh, that Jeremy Corbyn bloke, he sounds like he's going to put a big old tax on my 2 foot square garden. Yeah.
And I suppose that's probably kind of one of the points I was making there, that yes, the consciousness was tax rises, because it's true, Labour were going to raise taxes, but it was on the top 5% of the country, which is 80 grand and above. So the media didn't
whoa. 80 grand? I earn 80 grand. I'm not even in the top 50% of the country.
Yeah. Excuse me. I run my own business.
That guy races motorbikes on the Isle of Man, by the way. Just thought everyone would like to know. So I
He
couldn't.
what?
So, that guy from Question Time who talked about
Yeah.
earning £80,000 and not being in the top 50%. He races motorbikes on the Isle of Man, and he had to shave his beard because people kept recognising him in the street and calling him an idiot.
No way. Oh, that's
That was
brilliant.
very funny.
That's justice there, though, isn't it? That's actual
Yeah, it's
public
true.
justice.
I have to rename my channel now.
It was. It took me a second to clock on to what you were referencing. So I was like, "You earn 80 grand?" I took a moment for.
Champagne socialist.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, she got that Hassan deal from Twitch. It's all good.
That's true. That's true. My 20
If
viewers
you,
are very generous.
If you were a champagne socialist, you probably wouldn't be filming off your iPhone. You probably would be having the. Although to be fair, your camera setup actually looks really good. But yeah, not digging.
Actually, my camera set is literally just my phone. I just got my phone connected up to my PC.
I think I've wasted a lot of money than all this fucking tech, and it ends up looking.
I know yeah. I mean, I'm sure.
I mean, to be fair, right now I've just got a lamp on me, so.
That's fair. I got a ring light got from Tenor from B&M. Anyway, back to the point you're making around there was the tax is the big issue optically for the Labour Party. Go.
Yeah, so it was obviously in the public consciousness that Labour were going to raise taxes. Obviously, it was only going to be for the wealthy. But yeah, what you were saying that the way the media construed it was like everyone's going to get their taxes increased. When it's funny when the Conservatives have been the ones raising taxes. What about national insurance? You know. But having said that, I probably have a bias because, you know, in my head, I know all the policies. So maybe I'm assuming that everyone else knows all the policies. I need to sometimes remember that actually I talk about and think about politics every single day. Not everybody does. So when I do say, the media does report about politics, that could just be my bias showing.
Also, I think that, again, not to just rag on the British people too much, but I think we've got to factor in a kind of pseudo shy Tory syndrome situation, where, you know, the shy Tory, the idea that they won't admit to pollsters that they're going to vote Conservative, and yet they do. I think that's true on a more policy by policy basis as well. They realise that saying I hate all immigrants and all immigrants need to fuck off is bad, so they'll say, oh yeah, I support immigration, and then vote for Hitler. You know, like they'll do. This is the thing that a lot of British people do, because they're fucking cowards at the end of the day. And they do this with, you know, nationalisation, the NHS, etc. Like, everyone knows that Corbyn was telling the truth when he brought out that document and said, look, they're going to try and sell it off to the Americans. Everyone knew it was true, and the media just pretended like it wasn't, and the British public voted for Johnson.
But they're more angry about where he got the information from than the actual contents of that.
Exactly, leaked documents
from Russia.
There are two things that I do want to say about Boris Johnson's victory here, which I think a lot of people just. It kind of, again, another thing that gets left out in the media, because there's a couple of things that, if you point them out, it might vindicate the left-wing platform for Jeremy Corbyn. And the first of all is that Boris Johnson was a left-wing Tory. I don't know, people don't like to think that he is, because a lot of his, the way in which he acts in the way like someone who believes themselves as better than everybody else would act. He feels like he's above the law. He feels like he's above everybody else. It's obvious that he does that, and he's clear that he is not a principled person in any sense of the word. Far from it. But his policy platform was left-wing for the Conservative Party. He was an anti-austerity candidate, promising to build hospitals, level up the country. Obviously, those things never happened. I'm not saying they were going to happen either, but it was clear that his platform that he was trying to sell to the public was, I am the Tory candidate that ends austerity. I'm not a fusty establishment candidate. I'm the guy you can go to the pub with, right? Obviously, he isn't. He is an establishment candidate, but the platform that he was trying to sell to the public was reasonably left-wing, considering the recent history of the Conservative Party. And the reason why he was forced to do that, whether he wanted to or not, was because the Overton window had been moved by the Labour Party at the time. There was people wanted an end to austerity. It was very clear, and so he had to move the platform move over to the left. And second of all, is that when you actually look at the results of the election, he only won because of the retired. Every single working age demographic who's not a pensioner, all majority voted for the Labour Party. Everyone under 65 majority voted for the Labour Party. So the idea that it was something to do with Corbyn specifically, rather than the demographic change of the country, I think too much is attributed to the fact that, people just didn't want the left wing that Corbyn wanted, because they wanted lots of what Boris was putting down, which was some government intervention, more than we got from previous years. And second of all, when you look at the demographic divide on who voted who, actual working people in this country, the God's honest tax-paying members of this country, they supported Labour in the majority.
And 2017 was largely down to turnout as well, because you had a higher turnout amongst, obviously, working people and the younger people. And there was a lot of disaffected Tories. I mean, the turnout didn't actually go down with the Tories, right? I'm not sure the numbers on the actual number of votes. Obviously, they still got a historic 41%, which is huge. But there were a lot of people who were kind of pissed off Theresa May and the dementia tax.
Yeah, but look. So hang on, MTG. I'm hearing gulags for the pensioners. Is that the policy option now?
I do think we need to rethink the way our economy is stratified. National insurance is a dumb tax. You should get rid of it. It's a tax on working people that pensioners don't pay, despite the fact that working people are getting their incomes shafted with far below inflation pay rises, in some ways like stratospherically lower pay cuts in real terms currently, whilst pensioners are being protected by the triple locks. They're getting above inflation pension increases. But meanwhile, a quarter of pensioners are millionaires, and the vast majority of people in poverty in this country are in work. This is not a society where the way in which we distribute income in this country is being done on a fair basis. Obviously, the first port of call needs to be wealth taxing the rich, which one thing we explicitly are not getting from Starmer. Him and Reeves have completely written off the idea of wealth taxes, which are necessary to deal with the imbalance in this country, which you cannot put right with tax increases on income. We're going to have to take people's money away from them. That's the only thing that's going to actually solve it, is take people's wealth away from them. And so I think that we have a lopsided economy where pensioners have more disposable, they spend more on non-housing consumption than fucking Zoomers, right? The actual consumer demographic, young people in this country, do not have as much money as pensioners do to spend on discretionary expenditure. It's nonsensical and lopsided and makes no fucking sense. And that's why boomers were happy to vote for Boris Johnson. They will continue to vote Conservative, because their material interests does not lie in making life better for working people specifically. It lies in ensuring their property prices increase in value and ensuring their pension provision is protected, and that's it.
That's why they don't have a future, the Conservatives. Excuse me. That's why the Conservatives don't have a future, because this is a bubble that's going to explode again. Because what you said about people not spending any money, that's true. Workers don't have spending power. At a time when you've got huge inequality, where companies are posting record profits, you're also seeing the high street collapse. You're also seeing businesses close down, and then you've got a contradiction there, which is like, we need to suppress workers' wages in order to make a profit, but those workers now can't spend money to create jobs. So we need people to spend money, and people aren't spending money, and we're putting it in places where it's not needed. One of them is landlordism. People are getting second houses, and they're making money off people who can't get a fucking house, or those are locked into rent because rent is too high and it's actually cheaper to get a mortgage, but you can't get a mortgage in the first place because all your money's going rent. And then secondly, yes, I'm not saying that all pensioners are rich or anything, but there is a priority for the Conservative Party to make sure pensioners are all right above those who are actually working to earn a wage. This is something that is producing explosive inequality, but it can't last forever. I do wonder if maybe that's part of the polling we're seeing now, because this is an existential threat to the Conservative Party, or not?
Well, that's where I have some sympathy. Sympathy with the position that Starmer has taken. I understand why he's doing it. When you look on a material analysis of the position that Starmer's taking, if you are in his position and all you want to do is win an election, and you're looking at the Conservative Party's positioning on this, and that you can see that the first time since 1992, or 93 even, I guess it was Black Wednesday, I believe. The first time you've seen the Conservatives break the cardinal sin of British politics, which is fucking with people's mortgages, right? That's the one thing that people would usually think are always going to be protected under a Conservative Party, and they've broken that rule. So Keir Starmer is saying, well, if I entirely cuck myself out to centrism and the establishment politics, because the Conservatives have no position on the economy anymore, we can completely rout them at the next election. But I cannot do that unless I appeal to this gigantic pensioner demographic and this gigantic middle class demographic that has consistently voted for the Conservative Party up until this time. That's what Blair did, right? Blair looked at a aspirational generation of new homeowners because of right to buy out of the policies of the Thatcher administration in the 80s and said, to win an election, I have to appeal to this demographic. Now, the problem is, I think that there is a long-term problem with, I've talked about this on my channel, I think the long-term problem of this is that what I'm essentially saying is that Keir Starmer thinks he has to abandon class politics to win the next election to get middle-class people on side because they've generally turned off away from class politics over the last 50 years. And if he does that, 5 years' time, after Keir Starmer wins, nothing will change because he will only do policy that benefits boomers and middle-class people. Working-class people on the bottom end of the income scale will not turn towards the Labour Party anymore because they can't, because the Labour has become the Blair right wing that it was 20 years ago, and instead they will go to the far right. And that is my fundamental position on this. So rather than just talking in devil's advocate, my actual position is I will refuse to vote Starmer, specifically in national elections, specifically for that reason. A Labour Party that fixes nothing is creating more long-term problems than a Conservative Party that's bad now.
Yeah, well, this is. Go on,
sorry, Kevin. Are you right? I've got to go in a second.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Sorry, if I just say a couple of things. First of all, I would vote for Starmer in an election reluctantly, and for the very simple reason, I would say, hey, this guy is a liar. You can't trust anything this guy says. But the one guarantee is that you will not have the Conservative Party at the head of the country, and therefore you might get a few shadow cabinet members that are willing to do something to try and fix our slide into increasingly reactionary conservatism / fascism. And two, I would also say that Starmer does have a tough job now, because in full fairness to him, he is following up possibly the greatest Labour Prime Minister that we've ever had, in Liz Truss. So, with that act to follow up, he's going to have a really hard time getting Labour's polling up when he becomes Prime Minister, because he's never going to do it better than Liz Truss did. Right, I've got to go. I have to run off. I'm sorry, I wasn't planning to leave this early. I've just got a couple of things that I need to do in town. Someone's texted me and I need to run. So I hope we can have a conversation like this again in the future, because this was
more panels.
amazing.
To spread the love.
More panels, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Lovely to see you all. Yep, I will catch you all a little bit later on. Sorry to depart like this, but I'll see you all a little bit later on.
No worries. Needs man.
Take it easy.
Bye.
I really thought he was going to say Tony Blair then. The greatest prime minister since Tony Blair. I was like, oh, fucking hell.
One point I did want to sort of bring us back to when Curtis said that the Tory party have no future because of essentially the incoming and continuous financial collapse of a system that's completely unsustainable. The problem I have with that, that's the way it should work out. If any kind of justice, no justice MTG, different justice as a general concept, was to be enacted in the situation, that's the way it would work. But unfortunately, with the media we've mentioned before, and the fact that the British electorate are the most cocked motherfuckers in the history of the world, I would think that actually that they'll be able to make it all about, they'll do the too much government intervention, we need the free market, or too many immigrants, or too many this, too many that. They'll turn it in any which way they can to defend neoliberal capitalism. Now, I suspect they may be successful in the short term, at least.
Yeah, well, as what we've seen in America and across Europe, obviously right-wing parties are massively leaning into culture wars, and that's, for want of a better word, that's the Conservatives' trump card, which is we are not delivering on the economy. People no longer trust us on that. We've lost that credibility, and they will lean into culture wars. Of course, that's always a danger. However, we've been seeing it in the last couple of years, and it hasn't rescued them. So, and I'm not making assumptions that is not possible, but for the short to medium term, I can't see anything that the Conservatives can do, because if you look at the demographic aging, it's phenomenal. The polling difference between younger and older people is huge. Even I think it was when Margaret Thatcher won, she actually polled higher among younger people than Labour did. That's completely turned around, which is also the idea where when you get more conservative when you get older is actually a complete myth. I always believed that anyway, but now we can see demographic aging and the way people's polling is and voting intent. We can see that actually no, you don't become conservative as you get older. It's a response to material conditions. So for the future, progressive parties and progressive politics have literally the future. The Conservatives, like I said, will really ram that culture war politics, but it doesn't seem to be working for them right now. I mean, we've got literally Suella Braverman talking like an actual fascist. We had a woman whose grandparents or parents were killed in the Holocaust, and Suella Braverman just stood up in front of us and said, "I don't apologise for my language in terms of refugees." These are horrible people in government, and it's not rescuing them right now. But you are absolutely right. Never underestimate the British people voting against their interests, and they might have a new strategy going forward, but I just don't see it.
I mean, millennials aren't just left wing. They're also getting more left wing as they age. Aaron Bastani was pointing this out on TikTok, in that what people would usually expect to happen, as you mentioned, the kind of received wisdom of people getting more conservative as they age. It's not that millennials are more left-wing than boomers, that's obvious. Millennials are also getting into their 40s and becoming more radical over time, which is actually, that is unprecedented, right? There's always been some level to which most people tend to get slightly more right-wing as they get older, rather than this massive spike of very right-wing old people and very left-wing young people that we have currently. This is a new paradigm. The old paradigm was just some way in which you tended to get more right-wing as you get older, due to, as you said, your response to your material conditions, right? And the opposite is happening now, where people are getting incredibly radical as they age, and they realise, and again, all of the benefits of capitalism that we were told we'd all get never materialised for our entire generation. So we've rejected the entire system, and that's spreading throughout our demographic.
Based.
And that's why I think that we don't have to necessarily, like, I still think, regardless of whether leftoids vote for Keir Starmer or not at the next election, he'll still get a gigantic majority. It's clear as day to me that he does not need left-wing voices or votes to win this next general election. And what we are doing, if we do give him an even larger majority than otherwise, is he can then, if the very few left-wing elements of the party that are left, he can completely ignore them. The entryism of the Blairites in the 90s will happen again. We'll have a huge surge of new MPs in the party who will then become right-wing establishment candidates because everybody else is being removed from the fucking ballots to even be on the long list to become an MP in the next general election. So
that's precisely. Sorry, I was going to say that was precisely Keir Starmer's plan. His long-term plan for the next couple of years is to reform the Labour Party in his image. And as we've seen from Michael Crick, and I think he's done a brilliant job of covering the candidate stitch-ups that Keir Starmer's doing, is that he's looking at potentially a really big majority. And it's important for him and his advisors to make sure that these new influx of MPs are loyalists, are Blairites, because if Keir Starmer were to win a huge majority but didn't do anything to reform the party's own image, it's possible that there could be an influx of new left-wing MPs, and he doesn't want that. So he's making sure that not just the current state of the Labour Party stamps out left-wing politics, is that the future of the Labour Party never sees left-wing politics again, which I refer back to what I first said when I appeared on the stream, that I don't see there being ever a left-wing candidate leading the Labour Party ever again, because they are putting so much effort into ridding socialism and even basic social democracy from the Labour Party. So, well, in short, politics is fucked for the next decades.
It's like
I think that's undoubtedly true. Yeah.
So I could definitely take the position that if you know your local Labour candidate well enough and you know them to be a proper, actual, genuine left-wing MP, someone could theoretically might convince me to vote for them, even in this current condition. But the fact that the party is so explicitly hostile to socialists at this point, and not like on policy platforms, but just in the internal party machinations where they're getting exiled, expelled, removed from the party. They're not just in the internal party membership as well. The entire party apparatus is rejecting the union movement, like to the point at which Unite, CWU, a bunch of these other unions are considering disaffiliation. Unite have already pulled huge amounts of funding from Labour Party, and rightly so. The question, and because the other argument would be, like previously in the Ed Miliband, Gordon Brown days, the argument would be like, if you're a union member, and like most leftoids, we believe the genuine vehicle for political change is going to be the union movement, you would much rather have a Labour government in power because you know they cannot be hostile to you for the sake of their own campaign funds. And Keir Starmer doesn't understand this. And Keir Starmer is at the point where he is so antagonistic to the union movement. He's so far removed from the Labour Party's roots as well, because he joined in fucking 2015. He's a young MP. He's not been an MP for very long, and he's only done it because he knows that the Labour Party, as an establishment party, is the place he can use to further his political career, rather than because he believes in the Labour Party.
Isn't it?
Yeah, he doesn't believe in the Labour Party's ideological precepts that founded the party to begin with. Amusingly funny for someone called fucking Keir of all things.
To say, well, he's got the only thing is the name Keir. Yeah,
exactly. That's his only connection to the roots of the Labour Party at this point. So I don't know. And then he's pulling he is removing the one thing that could keep genuine socialists from voting for him by rejecting the union movement. So much so that it's bankrupted the party. He's thrown members are leaving in their droves. The union subs are leaving in huge amounts because they're disaffiliating, and he's also paying gigantic amounts of failed lawsuit money just as a...
Doesn't even need to do that.
Yeah, he's using it optically to just show the media and the public that he hates Corbynites, so much so that he will incinerate his own member subs to posture against them.
I don't know why any Labour, Labour movement, any trade union would even affiliate with the Labour Party, given the way in which he has been, at best, mealy-mouthed and at worst, antagonistic towards the current round of strikes. He's not supported these people in the slightest. So why the fuck are they giving him money? They should all disaffiliate. I mean, ironically, as unions, they should, I don't know, collectively get together and do some sort of action, which might lead to a better outcome for them collectively, like a kind of union of unions type deal. You know, you think they understand that dynamic, but apparently not.
The TUC could literally do this, right? The TUC are the official opposition at this point.
Yeah, but I understand why they're not all doing that, because there are many in the trade union movement who bleed blood of the Labour Party, and there's a historical link there. And then there's also a lot of reactionaries in the trade union movement. I mean, I would say most trade unionists are progressive, but there are some really right-wing people in there too. I think they also believe that they still hold some sway, and that leaders have come and gone, but unions and the Labour Party have always stayed together. I think we're seeing something that is unprecedented. Which again, Michael Crick said under Keir Starmer, that every other leader had a space for the left. Keir Starmer is making sure they're gone. I think unions still believe they have some sort of leverage, and if they were to leave, then they would never able to rejoin, because I think it gives more credit to Keir Starmer. If they were to leave, Keir Starmer like, right, I'll wash my hands of it altogether. I don't need you, and they won't be able to work their way back in. I'm not saying it's a particularly good argument. I'm just trying to see it from their point of view. If you ask me, I would still rather some unions. Sorry.
What are they even getting from it?
I don't know. I really don't know. But
they're funding their own hangman. It's ridiculous. Like, he's not going to. At best, he might repeal some anti-union trade legislation, but I don't think he'll even do that.
No,
what's the fucking point of it?
It was a pledge, so I'm almost certain he's going to.
He's got to. He pledged to the people. One thing we know about Keir Starmer, he's a very honest man.
They wouldn't lie about it.
I mean, if he's gonna spend his time swanning around at Davos, being a little cock bitch boy to the CBI, right? And if he's gonna go around and do that, how can he ever be pro-union when he is deliberately trying to be on the side of not just businesses but business leaders of industry, the people who are part of the chambers of commerce, the actual people at the top of the consortium of business interests when he knows full well that the one thing that opposes the power of these business leaders is the union movement that he's supposed to fucking represent. It's a completely untenable position.
But this goes to the root of Blairism, because I remember when Tony Blair said, probably I think it was like last year, he said that the link between trade unions and the Labour Party was a mistake. That the historical link was a mistake, and actually Labour should be a broadly progressive party.
Tony Blair's
It's fucking
dad
insane.
Tony Blair's dad not pulling out was a fucking mistake. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Fucking war criminal piece of shit should be in fucking jail. Anyway,
And again,
sorry,
the other thing, the other reason why I won't vote for Starmer as well is that one of the big things I've talked about a lot on stream as well, which you might have come into contact with, you might not have, whatever, is that Labour has abandoned class politics, and that's bad for the disaffected working classes as well. But have you ever spoken to people and they will discuss Labour only in terms of the Blair administration, right? Because that's the only actual implemented Labour policy that they can even remember at this point. Because most people don't remember the Callaghan or the Wilson years at this point. And so
exactly
their optical viewpoint of the Labour Party is them being a middle class party. Because it is at this point, essentially. Under Starmer and under Blair, it was a middle class party. Cared about middle class interests. And I fundamentally still believe, even to this point, that the Labour Party is going to be the only vehicle outside of the union movement. A proper Labour Party that is linked to the union movement, like an old school Labour Party, is the single vehicle that we have for proper institutional progressive change in this country. I still believe that, even after all of this nonsense with Keir Starmer. If we put Starmer into power, and there's 5 years where nothing fundamentally changes a la Joe Biden, nothing actually gets better for working people, and the country continues to be a neoliberal country which has a gigantic Gini coefficient where things are massively unequal and the rich are allowed to swan around without actually properly paying their fair share of taxation. 5 years of that will continue to keep people in this mindset where Labour is an establishment middle-class party. And that is the most damaging thing possible, because then all progressive change immediately wiped out, not just in the short term, but in the long term too. Because young people hate the Tories, and young people believe in the Labour Party. They believe in Keir Starmer, especially young people who aren't properly engaging with the political system, which is a long time electoral base Labour Party, young people and minorities, and he's fucking over both of them. And if he continues to do that for 5 years in power, then the future people who would theoretically be part of the future progressive change will then also leave the Labour movement.
Yeah,
and that's dangerous.
Yeah. I think one of the sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, is it worth therefore continuing to engage in a way that you've said you won't, in terms of you won't vote for Keir Starmer and try and keep a one foot in the door, or do we just wait for the boomers to die and for the Gen Z, the guys, to come online and hope that changes the demographics enough that an actual leftist candidate could win? What do we do here? It's like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, that's why I think that it's important to the left movement specifically. It's all about there's also some electoral calculus going on in the background here, where if the poll gets closer, I might consider voting for Labour more, because it'll be closer to a hung parliament, in which case, if there's a coalition, that's actually probably an ideal situation. And we're more likely to get proportional representation, because Liberal Democrats will probably not go into any kind of agreement without it. Same with the Green Party too, and possibly even the SNP might try and push through proportional representation, even though it doesn't benefit them, because they're the only party in the whole of Westminster with any principles, the SNP. And also means that any lack of progressive change can't be specifically blamed on the Labour Party at that point, right? Conservatives managed to get away with so much of austerity because it was a coalition government where there was always some level of plausible deniability over the issues of what happened. Whereas it wasn't a real Conservative government, wasn't a real Lib Dem government. It was in the wake of the financial crisis. We can get away with the austerity. They can't do that after all of the Boris Johnson shit. Their reputation's been completely tarnished now.
No, that's all because of the left-wing economic establishment, please.
Obviously, true. Well, let's be real, but absolutely. But if there is this position where Labour are going to get a gigantic majority, the left, as a voting bloc, need to reject it. I'm fully of that opinion.
The ideal position, or the ideal scenario, is a Labour minority government. A Labour majority government will be dangerous, as you just pointed out, for the future of politics, because it essentially will give a a mandate to rid politics of progressivism or left-wing politics or socialism, because we don't need these people, and that's where the future of the Labour Party will go, right? Because I can see the Americanization of politics right now. The way our political debates are forming is looking a lot like the US, and I can see that our political party is going to become like the Democrats and Republicans. However, a thought experiment, I'm not saying I want the Tories to win. I'd be very happy if the Tories lose, and a Labour minority government is what I want. But a thought experiment would be the future of progressive politics. It could be ideal for Labour to lose, because as we've just pointed out, if Labour win, it shuts out progressive politics for a long, long time. But if Labour lose, then potentially that could mean a change in leadership. Now, what happened with Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, for me, the biggest issue of Corbynism wasn't even electorally. It was the fact they could not change the party from within. Had he fully democratised the party, then it wouldn't have mattered if Corbyn got slaughtered in 2019. We could have had another leadership election which was democratised. We could have local MPs democratised. It would be a democratic party, and it'd be a way to actually democratise the country. And I think less people would care about Corbyn in the future, because we've reformed the Labour Party. Now, Corbyn losing in 2019 was a disaster because he couldn't change the party. Had he changed the party first, that would have been great. So maybe if Keir Starmer goes in the next couple of years by losing, he might go before he reforms the party completely in his own way. Because if he wins, he'll spend 50% of the time being a Stalinist within the party, as well as being a Stalinist authoritarian. I can't even fucking say the word anymore. He'd be a Stalinist piece of shit as Prime Minister as well. So you could say, and I know people will definitely say I'm a Tory enabler now, but actually, for the future progressive politics, Keir Starmer losing the election is actually good for the long term. Maybe not the short term.
I want to point out. I just want to address something. Someone in my chat, who's pointing out, who's saying that they object to accelerationism and they don't think it works. I want to be very clear that my position on this is not in an accelerationist perspective. I don't believe that to be able to properly invigorate class consciousness in this country, it is necessary for the Conservatives to be in power to make things worse. That's not what I genuinely believe. My actual point here is I believe Keir Starmer will make things worse. I think the decline of the country will continue with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. Unlike, for example, in the US, where Joe Biden being in charge has genuinely made things better. Whereas I don't think the same would happen with Keir Starmer. So I just want to clarify that I do not believe in accelerationism.
Yeah, so I don't believe in that either. That was just a thought experiment.
The point isn't an accelerationist one. It's that regardless of who gets in, it's going to be Conservatives making things worse.
Yeah.
The point. It's not accelerationism. It's almost the inevitable outcome, and depending on which brand of conservatism gets in and the impact that would have. The point I would just briefly sort of bring back to when they said that having a Labour minority government would be best. Now, in theory, that might be true in the sense that a proper Labour leader might reach out to the SNP, who are to the left of them, or the Liberal Democrats, who aren't necessarily to the left of them, but are to the left of the Conservative Party, and seek to have some sort of either supply and confidence situation, or some sort of minority, some sort of a coalition of sorts. With what we've said about Keir Starmer having conservative inclinations naturally, it seems to me rather more likely that he would reach out to the sort of mild conservatives and seek to have a kind of Labour-Tory coalition by proxy, and that ultimately would lead to a more right-wing government than if he had a majority, potentially.
I mean, the thing is, I think, though, is if it's a minority government, or even a small minority government, a majority government, similar in a position where the working majority is like one or two or three seats, right? If those are the cases, then to be able to put through legislation, he has to rely on the SCG. If the SCG vote down legislation, in the case of a small majority or a minority government, then Keir Starmer essentially loses the confidence of the House at that point. And that is a good position for the SDG to be in, because they have leverage now. The left of the party have some leverage, which won't be the case if it gets a fucking massive majority. And also, let's be real as well. As funny as it would be, as hilarious as it would be for the Conservatives to end up on fucking 20 seats or whatever it is, that's not good for democracy. Let's be real, right? We are ideologues. We all believe that socialism is correct, but that we don't agree. Everyone doesn't agree with us. It is bad for democracy for Keir Starmer to have 500 seats in Westminster. That is not good. That's bad for, regardless of whether
especially someone like Keir Starmer, though, because Keir Starmer is, I think he's an authoritarian. I think that's what
terrifying,
he is.
yeah.
So that is, yeah.
Can I just say, look, maybe I'm more of a ML than I thought, but frankly, the fewer seats the Tories have, the better. I'd happily see them get 0 seats and be swept into the dustbin of history. Keir Starmer's a piece of shit and an authoritarian, but the Tory party are worse on pretty much everything, or at least as bad at best. So I'm more than happy for them to be absolutely devastated.
I'm more on Kev's side.
I don't particularly think we even have a democracy, so I sort of don't care. I mean, the fact that the Scots clearly have been cheated enormously over A, promises made to them in 2014, and B, the fact that there clearly is a want for a second referendum, and Westminster is basically just saying fuck you to them. We don't really have a democracy. So the idea that, you know, the mother of all parliaments would somehow be besmirched by having, you know, a one-sided affair, I don't care. As much as it would be, look, a massive fucking 500 seat majority or whatever for Keir Starmer would be dog shit, it would be better than having any Tories there.
I see your point, but I obviously my fundamental belief outside. I mean, obviously it should theoretically underpin every socialist's belief as an axiomatic belief in the democratic process, in democracy, as an axiomatic principle that I would believe in, and the one of the things that's really bad about our political system is first past the post as an electoral system, which is fundamentally anti-democratic. And if we want to ensure that we have a good country moving forward, the progressive position is electoral reform as well as economic reform. And if we have a Labour leader who has fucking 500 seats in Westminster because they have been benefited by the stupid gains that they get from first past the post skewing the electoral outcomes, we will never see that ever. That proportional representation becomes an impossible pipe dream at that point.
I see PR as pretty much an impossible pipe dream anyway, unless with the smaller parties can make gains. Because
that's my
because Keir Starmer, well, even not just a Keir Starmer-led Labour Party, any form of Labour leader that wins a majority and supermajority, they have no incentive to support PR because like we've just won a massive majority on first past the post. So I really don't see that happening at all, because I think that our so-called democracy, our British democracy, is anti-democratic to its core, which is why I don't think we would see PR, because to its core it's anti-democratic. It has always been anti-democratic. Not to sound all conspiratorial, but we don't live in a democracy because there are obviously outside forces, like the mainstream media is one of them, then obviously the voting system, then our political parties, that we've been living under neoliberal capitalism despite multiple governments. So we don't live in a real democracy, and then the actual foundations of our Westminster system is anti-democratic. So I see no path to PR. The only path to PR is in probably like 100 years, when maybe the Conservative Party has been completely wiped out, and the official opposition is an SNP or another progressive party. And there's a seismic shift in politics. The way that the Liberal Democrats were the official, they were just the Liberals back then, were the official opposition and were replaced by the Labour Party. There needs to be a seismic shift, which this could be it, potentially. And the Conservative Party as an opposition is replaced by technically a progressive party. Maybe we see PR then, but I don't think we see it in my lifetime.
I mean, my position on this is based off of the fact that Ed Davies explicitly said that he is only willing to go into any coalitions if some kind of electoral reform, whether it's proportional representation, whether it's ranked choice voting, whether it's some change to the voter system to make it more democratic, is included in the deal that they have, coalition deal that they have without a referendum. He's explicitly made that point. That's the only way the Lib Dems will go into coalition with anybody.
Oh, they've learned their lesson from selling themselves for nothing last time. Well done, guys.
No.
Bravo.
You
I doubt they've
nothing.
learned
You
their
say
lessons.
nothing. Well, we got the 5p bag charge, Kev. Don't sell the Lib Dems short.
In favour of benefit sanctions. Thank God for that. You underestimate the Liberal Democrats. They're really shrewd politicians.
Yeah, all 4 of them in Parliament or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. The Lib Dems don't have the sort of sway that they used to have anyway. So I think Ed
that is
Davey
true.
is
Yeah.
a non sequitur. I think the Lib Dems are
It's certainly not as
completely
much as it was
irrelevant.
a few months ago when one of their former members was Prime Minister. Definitely. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, and also
I think
the Lib Dems will have more political capital, amusingly, in a world in which the Tories get kind of wiped out. Because part of the Tory wipeout is not just going to come from Labour Party winning in the North and in London and in inner city seats and suburban seats. It's also going to come from the Southwest, where I think people are far more tactical voting pilled than they ever have been in this country. And the Liberal Democrats are going to wipe out the Tories in the southwest as well, like they did in the by-elections in like Tiverton and Tractor Porn Guy, wherever his constituency was.
Tractor porn guy, amazing. Imagine that being your political epitaph.
It's the same way that Liz Truss is now the lettuce woman, and David Cameron is the pig fucker.
Boris Johnson gets up quite lightly because he should have the worst nickname ever. And
I mean,
he's Boris.
I still can't believe that it's just not like repeated on the news every day that this man conspired to have a journalist assaulted. Like, why is that? Why was that not played literally on loop?
Especially because that's going after their own as well. It's gone after part of the media class. You think that would create more of an uproar?
Yeah, really, exactly.
But Boris Johnson will go to America and he'll try and become president there.
I don't know what he's
Can't be the banter timeline.
He may be the next prime minister. If there's anybody who can rescue the Tories, it's probably Boris Johnson at this point.
Well, they made a mistake by getting rid of Boris Johnson because yes, he was polling worse than he was when he first got in because of Partygate, but he was still their best bet because there was still a core support of Boris Johnson. It was a huge mistake to get rid of him, but at the same time, he was right to go because he quite literally promoted a fucking sexual offender.
But I was about to say, with his support of rapists, he would definitely get the support of his backbenchers. Yeah.
He's gonna win over the Andrew Tate vote.
Oh, Bugattis for everyone on the
exactly. I can just imagine Boris Johnson getting up at like the lectern literally outside Number 10 and saying Bugatti. I can imagine that.
I can see Keir Starmer fucking coming out in support of Andrew Tate if it gets the middle class men involved.
Oh God,
It'll be a vote winner.
No,
That'll be on the timeline.
It's going to make his whole thing like it's instead of get Brexit done, it's going to be free top G or something like that. I guarantee it.
That sounds far more Boris Johnson because I think Keir Starmer is clearly going for the middle class women's vote. Actually, I think he's more in tune with that. That's why he's going all fucking turf pilled.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't mind that.
And that's another reason why, obviously, trans people. How can trans people fucking support Keir Starmer? How? In what universe can any trans person feel?
Well, you're clearly just part of the gay Starpo. So
the gay. That's true. I am part of the gay Starpo. Selling the big lie.
Those who don't know, don't necessarily follow the ins and outs of this. Posey Parker had yet another one of her little turf get-ups, and someone turned up with "Don't give in to the gay Starpo" on a sign. So they're just basically saying all gay people are, the Nazis.
Ironically, 2 weeks after one of her own fans at a protest quoted Mein Kampf.
You did.
Shit, I was not aware of that.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's completely unreal.
But the thing is, though, the term turf right is overstated because it essentially paints the idea that there's those radical feminists who are just transphobes. They're just 90% of them conservatives. Because you scratch a turf, you find a homophobe, you find a Nazi. So turf is overblown. I literally saw some post. It was like in the 90s when people were supporting gay rights, and there was like the reactionary comment, like it's a slippery slope. And then this is so true now because we supported gay rights in the 80s and 90s. they made the bullshit argument slippery slope. We've now got TERFs looking back on historic wins for queer people and saying, see, we told you. So they're not just fucking radical feminists who are against trans people. They're just fucking reactionary Nazi pieces of shit.
I mean,
that's it. That's all it is. They're just conservative. They are conservative. They're horrible people.
And it's frustrating because it's being used specifically by the right-wing press and media to try and get an alliance of convenience between, I would say, progressive women, but it's mostly liberal women, right? People who are in the mold of J.K. Rowling, people who fancy themselves as being progressive, but progressive for the 90s. They feel like the progressivism, like most liberal types, they feel like social change is only good up to the point at which they stopped being part of the social change. And anything outside of that, they can be reactionary against. And that's why liberals have all become reactionaries over time, because they didn't actually have a belief in liberalism, which is the big irony that I would call them liberals when they are actually conservative. Because one of the things about genuinely good things about liberal ideology is the belief in the progression of these kind of things over time. I make this criticism of liberals, classical liberals, all the time, where they say, "Oh, well, we need to preserve the institutions." I'm like, sorry, what? That's not
a liberal position.
That shouldn't. I mean, it is a liberal position now, but it shouldn't be a liberal position considering
it's a bastardization of a liberal position.
Well, because the only reason why we have liberal democracies in the West at this point in time, because in England there was a fucking civil war, and in France there was a fucking revolution. that's the genuine liberal position. But obviously, most classical quote unquote liberals, what they actually mean is they've read Adam Smith once, and that's all they believe in.
And liberals today support social movements where there's no violence, proper peaceful protests. And, they did it the proper way back in the day. And you'd realise when you actually study social movements in the past, they're incredibly violent. They're incredibly antagonistic.
Are we suggesting, are we going with guillotines for 2023? Should we do that? Let's go.
And also, J.K. Rowling, like, she sees herself as progressive, but she's so fucking conservative. She has an alias called Robert Galbraith. The guy who was he supported, or like the one of the founders of gay conversion therapy? That's not even a milquetoast liberal thing to have. And by the way, no one's fucking saying anything about that. Everyone in the mainstream media, who like the corners of the media who think they're liberal too, who are just as reactionary as J.K. Rowling, coming out in support of her, they're saying fuck all about that. I think that's a huge deal. She still says, "Oh yeah, look, it's on her Twitter profile." My alias is Robert Galbraith. This guy's what the fuck?
It's deliberately being done by the media. It almost feels like a conspiracy at this point, even though I know it's not. It's just how the media works, but it does feel like a conspiracy. Every single piece of trans stuff that gets reported on by them is always being specifically reported to be against trans people by omission, right? The amount of conversations that you have with people saying, all I heard was that J.K. Rowling said that sex was real and that we need to protect women but be nice to trans people, and that's just not her position in the slightest. She's advocate taking away all of our healthcare. She hangs around with Matt Walsh, a man who calls himself literally a theocratic fascist, who wants to have doctors who engage in gender-affirming care executed, who is against abortion, who is like somebody who fervently believes in anti-feminism, and J.K. Rowling hangs around with this person and lionises his positions.
Can we point out the incredibly racist names she gives her characters as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
No, I mean, just it's so racist that I don't even want to repeat them.
On Twitch, yeah.
But 10 years ago, she was seen as a kind of a liberal icon, and she would consider herself that, and she probably voted Labour in the 90s, which kind of that kind of confuses me though, because when you dig into her stuff, she is very conservative, very right wing.
Well, she literally gave. I mean, you two are both whippersnappers, but I remember when she gave £1 million to Tony Blair's Labour Party.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is that it just shows as well, right, just how right-wing Blair's government was.
Yeah.
And how it was a rejection of left-wing politics. And again, as in the words of Peter Mandelson, we are all Thatcherites now. And that was the guy, that was fucking the spin doctor, him and Alistair Campbell, the spin doctor of the Labour Party. They fervently believed in right-wing politics at that point. That's why J.K. Rowling was happy to support them. And again, because these liberal, quote-unquote, liberal, classical liberal types like J.K. Rowling do genuinely believe that they are progressives. Yeah. They do. They still, and they almost to this day will purport to be progressives too.
Of course.
But
Well, J.K. Rowling thinks she's
because-
the greatest
because-
feminist ever.
Yeah, because they still live in the 90s. They think that the progressivism was great, and then as soon when Section 28 was repealed, anything after that is too far, right?
Yeah. That's how politics began in 2016. We were the beacon of democracy during 2012 and the Olympics. And then what happened in 2016, everything changed. Of course, nothing about austerity, nothing about neoliberalism, all that shit.
Oh God, liberals are the worst for that. Oh, every single time when you just go like, well,
You just missed 2012.
The country was great before Brexit happened, and I'm just like, 330,000 people fucking died.
I tried making the analogy. I remember I met this guy. Where was I? I was in fucking Cambodia, actually. This is 2018. And I met the most, like, James O'Brien Remainer type guy. And the first half of the night, we were talking about politics. We agreed with so much. And then Corbyn's name dropped. And he's like, oh, that fucking Corbyn's a communist. And I went, oh my fucking God. So I said, no, he's not a communist. He's a socialist, but he's offering a social democratic program, blah, blah, blah. Then we got onto Brexit, and he was saying shit like, we need to reverse Brexit because it wasn't legally binding. And I'm like, oh, fuck off. Like, look, I voted Remain, but you can't have a democratic vote and then say, well, based on bits of paper, we should repeal it. And I mean, I've completely actually forgotten my train of thought.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's very funny that he was calling Jeremy Corbyn a communist in the land of Pol Pot. I think it's a delightful piece of historical bullshit. That's quite nice. But anyway.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, actually, no, that was, I've returned to my thought. And I made the argument, I make it to a lot of people, those who, like the Ramonas, I call them. I want to take it away from Brexiters. Like, I voted Remain. But I would say, if Remain is everything about politics and Brexit is everything about politics, go talk to a homeless person about the referendum. Would you go up to a homeless person and say, how are you going to vote in this referendum? They're going to say, I want some fucking food. I'm not thinking about that. And that's why their narrow-minded view of politics.
They're literally Rishi Sunak.
I was about to say, yeah, they're considering a career in finance.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that it's incredibly frustrating group, right? Because you know, remember how the entirety of the Corbyn period in the Labour Party, everyone and their fucking dog was talking about the metropolitan liberal elite. And when they said that, what they were referring to specifically was mostly actually young people who lived in cities, as if people who are renters.
Well, some of them, let's be honest, some of them were also JQ posting.
I mean, they were. That's true. There was JQ posting too. But like, they were referring to like young people who lived in cities who were progressive in their politics, but actually they all work in minimum wage and renting in fucking Starbucks or some shit. And then nowadays, Keir Starmer is in charge of the Labour Party. When was the last time you heard anybody talk about the metropolitan liberal elite? When the genuine people who are voting for Starmer are the metropolitan liberal elite.
Yes,
the Remainer types who, quite frankly, have had their wallets inspected by Keir Starmer over Brexit now that he's completely gotten rid of the only sensible thing, which is rejoining the single market. He's clearly hoodwinked these people too, hilariously, because again, he doesn't care about anything other than power. Will lie to anybody to get power. These are the people who are being appealed to by Starmer, and we saw this, right? We have evidence of this too, in that Starmer was losing votes. Remember the big council elections last year? Starmer lost loads of votes in councils in the north, the salt of the earth places in the Red Wall, where people expected Starmer to be gaining ground now that we've gotten rid of the crazy Corbyn who was disaffecting the working class when the stats from the election don't even show that either. And then the places where he gained loads of votes were like conservative councils in central London, places like Wandsworth. And I'm like, if anywhere is in the fucking country is like the hub of the metropolitan liberal elite, it's fucking Wandsworth, right? And people don't talk about this. The media don't talk. No one talks about this. And I'm like, yeah, because they don't want to admit that actually Corbyn did speak for the working class, and it showed you in who voted for him, and the reason why people did reject him, and there was the working class vote didn't turn against him in totality, but there was a shift away from the working class vote from Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, was because of Brexit. It was because of the stupid Brexit policy, which was the brainchild of fucking Keir Starmer at the end of the day.
The whole
Also, I was just going to say, part of the problem is with the media is that they are partly the metropolitan liberal elite. So why would they call themselves out? I guess
there was two factions within the Labour Party, which was as you said, was brought up all the time under Labour, which was the traditional working class and the metropolitan elites, right? And obviously, we talked about how the metropolitan elites were supposedly younger people going to uni. Some of them do fall into that category because they're more progressive on social issues, right? And one of the things that why Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote in 2017, and I try and make this argument for people that didn't quite get it, is that he managed to build that coalition between the so-called social progressives and the so-called working class because the injection of class politics into the Labour Party. But having said that, it's not just that these two camps are separate. They're not. They're all working class because you have people who go into uni in big metropolitan areas. They're still working class too. So there were some people in the media trying to say that actually Corbyn is, well, I mean, they're trying to say he's alienating both sides, but potentially could alienate the metropolitan elites because of his acceptance of Brexit. But we've had this idea for such a long time that only working class people vote for Brexit and everyone who votes Remain is middle class. Everyone is actually working class, regardless if they vote for Brexit or Remain. That's just true. It was more about left behind places due to austerity and age. So Corbyn managed to marry these two factions because he injected class politics. And in 2019, despite the manifesto being even more radical, class politics seemed like it was abandoned more because it became more about Jeremy Corbyn himself and obviously the unpopularity he didn't enjoy at the time. Now, Keir Starmer is strange. He was the whole metropolitan side of the Labour Party, being a hard Remain, and also literally pushing for the Labour Party to be a Remain party. Quite literally, we are Remain party now. Follows in the same trajectory as the 2019 election defeat, which is obviously like the polling is obviously down to the Conservative collapsing, but it's learnt no lessons from the 2019 election. Those northern left behind seats weren't being won by Keir Starmer, and that's where he brought up Wandsworth. So he's shored up a lot of support in the so-called metropolitan areas, and the left behind areas are more. They obviously voted the Conservatives temporarily to get Brexit done, but also they're not turning out to vote.
That's true. That's true. And I think because I think that's it's difficult because the real issue as well with the kind of, as you'd call them, Ramona types, and I've said that before as well because that's basically what they are, is that they won't take a pragmatic position, and quite frankly, these are the people that we have to blame for the hard Brexit that we're in at the moment, right? Who were the people who voted down the customs union amendment that was proposed by Ken Clarke? It was Lib Dems and it was Change UK. And those were the parties that were getting voted for by the kind of anti-Corbyn Ramona types that we had in the 2019 election. I can't vote for Corbyn because it's Brexit betrayal, for the crime of wanting to negotiate and to want to honour the democratic process of the referendum result. And
It's still brilliant to me that Change UK literally cock. Like, yeah. bit on the nose.
So, and it's frustrating because the snobbery that you get from these people too. Like when you have discussions about candidate selection within the Labour Party as well, and they will say, "Oh, we can't let Corbynites or even like Social Democrats onto the ballot of the long lists to be MPs because we are doing the electorate a disservice by giving them bad candidates to vote for." And I'm like, by what metric? Are you deciding now that you are the grand arbiter of what a good candidate is or isn't? How about you let the electorate fucking decide? How about you let the membership fucking decide rather than imposing this shit from the top down and assuming that you know better than everybody else, right? Again, I believe in democracy. If local members want to vote for a Blairite candidate, I would disagree with them for doing so, but it's absolutely their right to do so. And quite frankly, the whole Brexit debacle, the whole issue of the Labour Party post-Corbyn has just proved to me that Liberals just don't fucking give a shit about democracy, and they never have.
And Liberals were the biggest obstacle to progressive politics. They set politics back, progressives, so much because of their refusal to work with an actual progressive Labour government that wanted to stop hard Brexit. So yes, we can say that the right wingers have been an issue for toxified politics, But I think that the Ramonas and the People's Vote people, they set back progressive politics even more. They caused this. We have hard Brexit and a 80-seat majority Tory government because of them. It's their fault. I think it's largely their fault anyway.
I mean, there are definitely elements of them that are definitely to blame. And the frustrating thing is, I agree with them on so many things, right? Especially when it's frustrating, because if they'd have taken a compromise position that was what I was advocating for, customs union, single market, but continuing to leave the EU, then we would literally not be in the mess that we're in right now. You're absolutely right. And that level of compromise that they didn't give was essentially they are at fault for essentially the entirety of the same things that they also criticise Brexiteers for. And I criticise Brexiteers for these things too, in that so many Brexiteers wouldn't accept anything but hard Brexit because they genuinely believe that anything else would have been too close to the European Union. Despite the fact, in the run-up to the vote, both Nigel Farage and Daniel Hannan, the figureheads of Leave.eu and Leave was the other Leave campaign, I believe it was. That was Daniel Hannan's one. They both said that no one's talking about leaving the single market. We both want Norway agreements. We both want to join EFTA or some shit like that. No one was talking about hard Brexit up until the actual Brexit time happened. And so their position they took afterwards, where they refused to negotiate anything other than hard Brexit, was horrendous, and the Ramonas were quite right to call them out for it. But they completely ruined their chances of any kind of agreement or negotiation, A, because of their snobbery and the way that they looked at Brexiteers, and B, in the way that they refused to compromise on exactly the same principles that Brexiteers refused to compromise. And that's why we're in the absolute fucking mess we're in right now with Brexit. Because single market, because single market would have solved the fucking Northern Ireland border crisis that we're having right now. That's why Brexit is dragging on even further, is because, again, of this confluence of lack of compromise from the extremes of the argument. I sound like a fucking centrist right now. But then again, I guess my position on the European Union is a pragmatic one, rather than what it feels like for most...
Not an ideological one.
What most... I don't even think it's ideological for most Brexiteers and Remainers. I think it's far more vibes-based than anything concrete. I think it's far more about a club that they want to be a part of, if that sounds incredibly rude. But it does feel like half of the time it's just Remainers like the vibes of the European Union.
I'd say Remainers were more vibes-based because at least there was some actually good arguments in terms of Brexit. They were saying, like, the issue of democracy. Obviously, I end up voting Remain in the end, but I sympathise a lot with Brexit arguments, and I felt like there's a deep issue there when we go back to neoliberal capitalism and austerity. People had a genuine reason to be pissed off at the establishment, but Remainers, there was such a vibes-based politics, especially a lot of them were liberals who don't really have any principles in any way. There's a lot of Remainers who are conservative voters. They were in it for the vibes.
Well, the Conservative government literally campaigned for Remain.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's and it's very. I mean, Brexit is such a weird discussion to have because there's so many different points of view. And actually, Eddie Dempsey made a really good point because he's a part of Labour Leave. And he made the point that he sued the Electoral Commission. Actually, I think the RMT did, or someone from the RMT did, for the two people who got electoral funding to be the face of the Leave campaign were both right wing. Both Leave and Leave.eu campaigns were incredibly right-wing campaigns, and they were the ones who were being gifted by the Electoral Commissions to be the people who were the official spokespeople for the Leave campaign, which meant that there was, and that's partly why I think it was incredibly correct for every leftoid to vote Remain, because there was zero, after that decision, there was zero chance of getting anything good out of Brexit, regardless. It was always going to fail from that point, from a leftist position.
That's partly the reason why I vote Remain in the end as well, because we were expecting, or hopefully expecting, when the centre ground collapsed, we'd obviously see more of right and left and right politics. I thought the same was going to happen with Brexit. We're going to hear more Labour Leave and Lexit, and we didn't. It was all just. It was the funny thing is Brexit isn't a left wing or right wing issue, but the way it was dressed up in the media, that it was a left wing or right wing issue, and that was such a shame. I felt, because that was a. I think the media's role in that, and obviously now you just mentioned the Electoral Commission, which I didn't know, failed democracy as well, because there wasn't a genuine voice that was heard on the left by Brexit. So I was sympathising, but I voted Remain in the end, largely out of fear, largely because I didn't want to give credence to these racist bastards who were heading up the Leave campaign. I didn't want Boris Johnson to become Prime Minister, which is exactly what happened.
I mean, there is an alternate timeline, right, where the Electoral Commission don't make that decision, and there is a left-wing case made for Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn wins in 2017 and has a pro-worker future relationship with the European Union soft Brexit plan, right? It goes through smoothly because there's no fucking border crisis at Northern Ireland, which is, as I said, the main thing that's frustrating Brexit at this point too. And it's a massive. It almost certainly would be at least somewhat of a success.
That'll be a huge success. That'll be a huge success for progressive politics in general. A huge success for Corbyn's programme under the Labour government, and it would have secured, I think, easily a second term for the Labour Party. I don't know if I could imagine if Corbyn would have been standing again. Doesn't really matter. It would have been such a different timeline for British politics. Hugely immensely, and it's almost not worth thinking about because it gets you too upset.
I mean, you think about these small little tiny decisions that get made, and like the ways in which that they balloon outwards into other different things, right? Like remember Margaret Beckett with 1 minute and 30 seconds left to nominate Jeremy Corbyn to be leader of the Labour Party in 2015 to be put on the ballot. If she'd not done that, imagine how things would have turned out differently.
What would have happened? Thing is, in that instance, it would have been Andy Burnham winning the leadership contest, and I don't think much would have changed in politics because he would have led the party just like Ed Miliband. It would have been more well liked across the public, but there's no way he would have won an election. I think we'd be in a very similar mess. Without actually, at least with, I mean, I know people take the piss out of socialists for saying, well, we won the argument, but I mean, on austerity, Jeremy Corbyn did win the argument. Regardless of whether it's we materially have austerity or not, he did talk about that. Andy Burnham wouldn't have had an opposition to austerity. I think that things would largely remain the same. However, there probably would have been more austerity from the Conservatives because there was literally no pushback. But I don't see the political landscape changing all that much because I think the political landscapes change when a crisis happen. Or Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader of the Labour Party is a big is a big milestone in which change can happen because it was significant. Andy Burnham was quite a continuation of the current Labour Party, wasn't a particularly milestone. I don't think it would set the seeds or sow the seeds for a big political change. Obviously Brexit, I mean, I would probably assume that Brexit still would have happened, and of course that's a crisis where change could happen, but I don't think Andy Burnham would have been up to the job to really change things. Jeremy Corbyn, at least post-Brexit, managed to get hung Parliament because he starts talking about fucking class politics.
I mean, it's possible that Andy Burnham might have done even worse than 2017. But go ahead, Kev.
I was just going to say I'm going to dip at this point.
No, in which case, we've come all the way, but we've come full circle back round to Andy Burnham now, haven't we? So it might be worth some closing comments then in that case then.
Okay.
So I just think that, I mean, my position was in agreement with Curtis's tweet originally, in that Angela Rayner, reasonably soft left. Andy Burnham actually has come full circle from his time in 2015 where he was a Blairite candidate. He's now admitted, like to Novara Media of all places, which usually a genuine Blairite would have even entertained the conversation. And he said, under the Blair administration, we got privatisation wrong. Right? We got that wrong. He's joined the Enough is Enough campaign. He's clearly been pro-union. He's nationalised the bus system in Manchester. He has the leftist not the leftist, but he has the progressive credentials.
Walks the walk, because people say, you're falling for it, but he's actually done tangible things. And he has, I mean, not very harshly, but he has gone against Starmer, joining and talking about that privatisation isn't the way to go for the Labour Party. I think he's drawn his political battles now.
Yeah,
he's not hard left or anything, but he's willing to put himself out there.
And that's my position.
I disagree with this counter-revolutionary nonsense. I believe in Keir Starmer thought and the chairman will bring the glorious future to the people of this sceptred isle.
He's going to bring back Top Gear, isn't he? With
Top brings back Top Gear.
That's going to be his flagship policy. Bring the old gang back together. And bootcut jeans.
Yes, actually, you know what? If he brings back bootcut jeans, I'm good with that. If he says that he's going to remaster Time Splitters and give us a new one, I'll take that. I'm down with that.
definitely.
Let's
But
go.
yeah, that's my closing comments. That I just don't. I think that both of those candidates, and I think that things are. We shouldn't vote for Starmer because I believe that he's not. He will set back leftism and also is just almost as bad as the Conservative Party basically at this point. And
Not true. Not true. We should all support anarcho-Keithism.
anarcho-Keithism. But any move to the left, and I think, and an ending of the internal purges, those are my main obstacles for the vote for Starmer, right? The
And I
internal
don't think
purges
that Burnham or Rayner or anyone in their political circle would be doing the purges like Keir Starmer. That is also a large reason why I wouldn't mind voting for the Labour Party. I don't want to vote Keir Starmer, not just because of his positions, but also the way he's treated those in the party, the way he's treated trans people and the way he's treated people of colour. And in order to get these people more represented in the Labour Party, you need more democracy. Well, the way he's clamping down on democracy is just going to bring out more boring, gammon, Top Gear loving MPs, white men. That's all we're going to get into his regime.
I'd much prefer Angela Rayner. I think would be a much better option. But
yeah.
I also thought Corbyn was a better option, and apparently that makes me an anti-Semite, so I don't know.
Yeah, according to Supertansky, she's had a mare, hasn't she? Oh, she's had a fucking mare. I never thought, though, that you can get pictured with someone wearing a Hitler t-shirt and she's actually got like the Hitler moustache and still managing to blame Jeremy Corbyn and Corbynites on that one.
Yeah,
that's almost quite funny in the end. That's like, do you know what? You've got some fucking balls on you to do that.
She was absolutely furious.
Oh dear.
Come on. Anyway,
that's such a dad joke.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes, it is. Yeah.
Good time to wrap up, I think.
Bro.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Anyway, shout yourselves out for. I'm going to put this segment up on YouTube, so you shill.
I'm Kevin Logan. I also do things online. You should follow me on the various platforms.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter @CurtisDaily_, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/turn
Good debate. I'm glad we all agree that Keir is the best.
Brill. And thank you for the bits. I dropped that. And for people who are watching this, I don't know if you're obviously getting Kev's still streaming. You can find me at NoJusticeMTG, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the good self-masturbation
young
platforms.
People with your various social media platforms. It's a disgrace. Back in my day, it was pigeon carriers. That's it.
eBay and MySpace.
Exactly.
No worries. Right, I'll see you later, folks.
See ya.
Bye.